Serious, sailors, seamen and overall people who spend a vast amount of time in the ocean. Have you ever witnessed something you would catalog as supernatural or unusual? What was it like? In the Gulf of Aden, having been at sea for a while and with absolutely blistering heat, I heard my nickname called 3 times. Clearly and loudly. It was my first time with this particular crew and none of them knew my nickname. My best guess is dehydration and stress, but I'll never forget it. The closest to supernatural, or at least something I can't explain, happened halfway between Cornwall and the Scillies. We were sailing in a fresh breeze, 5 to 6 feet swells maybe. That's perfectly fine sailing weather, but the boat will rock and there will be quite a bit of noise from the wind, the sails and waves. So we sail happy along when suddenly the sea is perfectly flat and everything is quiet, like somebody turned the sound off. I look around and the water is pitch dark. It only lasted for a minute and then everything was back to normal, but I got a really eerie feeling. I have a theory. I think you sailed over a large patch of spilled oil. Half serious, but this would explain the ocean's color, and in large enough quantity, the oil could suppress the swell. Web link. Flew helicopters in the Navy for a few years. On my first deployment to Southeast Asia, I was flying over the Sea of Japan and saw a large pulsing aura of red light far enough below the surface I could not make out a source. We were 30-ish miles from shore and had not been briefed on any assets in the area that might make something like that make sense. No erroneous indications on instruments or radio chatter. Just slow, steady pulsing red light. We saw it, circled it a few times, made a note of the time and location we encountered it, and my crew chief asked if I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of there. So we finished our transit and I made a note of everything in my debrief. I passed it up the chain of command, but they basically wrote it off as some sort of visual phenomenon we had from a long day of flying in dry suits. It's always been hard to imagine our entire crew hallucinating the same thing. Edit. I didn't think this would blow up, but I appreciate all the input. As some of you have suggested possible submerged man-made objects like buoys, I would say this is unlikely due to the sheer size of what we saw. Underwater volcanic activity, as some of you suggest, actually makes a lot of sense. The light was probably 50 meters across and very bright. Those of you that suggested volcanic activity, I would like to ask if it would have something like a rhythm to it. The light would slowly brighten for about 3 seconds, dim for the same amount of time, then remain completely off for the same amount of time. If anyone knows, I'd appreciate it, and I could pass it to some of the guys that were on that crew and maybe put some dudes at ease. Fog. I don't care what anyone says, there is something in that fog. Edit. Not a joke. A dead calm with thick fog is creepy and will drive you to wild hallucinations. I imagine it's not dissimilar to a sensory deprivation chamber. Have you ever seen, 30 to 40, as good as I could determine, humpback whales feeding together? I know this isn't supernatural, but one whale is so seldom seen by people, let alone 30 scooping up krill at the same time. I'll never forget that. When I was roving patrol on a submarine, I always thought I saw someone walking parallel to me down missile compartment upper level. If I was on the port side, then I saw them on the starboard side and vice versa. I always chalked it up to pipes and valves creating weird shadows. Additionally, it felt heavy on that level, like there was some sort of presence, the feeling you get when someone's watching you. I never told anyone. Then one day a few weeks into patrol, one of the other rovers asked me if it felt weird up there. He specifically said that he saw someone up there too, just like I had. We shared stories and then talked to the third rover, and he said I only go up there to do my rounds every hour, then get the F out of that haunted level. I crewed on a tall ship, and we were anchored with a bunch of others in a harbor. We had to take shifts at night because it was an old boat and did weird things. I was on shift in the little steering cabin when I heard someone running around the deck. I thought it was one of the other crew, so I poked my head out and told them to knock it off. They kept running, and I was afraid they'd slip, so I followed them. We went around the whole ship twice before I caught up with a shapeless shadow which stopped and flew directly up into the air. Convinced it was a prank, I walked back to the end of the boat when I saw we had drifted on anchor and were almost under the bow of a much larger ship. I called the rest of the crew, and we sorted it out. But I might not have noticed until too late if it weren't for the weird shadow. That's a clawbotterman. I only worked as a walk-on, walk-off cabin attendant, but the old sea dogs always had far-fetched stories to tell. The engineer teaching us about watertight doors told us a story that happened to him on another ship that the same company used to own but was decommissioned and scrapped in 2011. These watertight doors separate the different bulkheads, underwater compartments that stop the whole ship from sinking if there is a hole in the hull. Think about the metal doors that slid down in the engine room of the Titanic. These doors are always closed. To get from compartment to compartment there was a lever that you pulled and the door opened, you stepped through, then as soon as you let go of the lever, the door would close. For the safety of the ship it would close tight shut, even if there was a person blocking it. On this older ship there was an engineer who tripped and was crushed to death in one of these doors. Years later this engineer who told me the story tripped and fell on that same door and was about to be crushed to death in the same way, but just before killing him, it stopped and opened again, despite no one being around and nothing touching the lever. And before anyone says that there must have been some safety thing installed. No, as I said before, the one job of these doors is to close no matter what, or who is in the way. I read a story here once where someone had family who sailed around the world. One day in the North Atlantic, their sailboat was going over some gigantic swells. They didn't have brakes at the top, so it was safe, but the boat was rising and falling way beyond the neutral. At the bottom of a trough their uncle looked up to see the sun behind a wave and the silhouette of a whale inside, above him. I was a sailor in the Navy. While I was on lookout duty on the bridge at night, a dude walked and stood beside me, breathing hard. I was looking out at sea, and I was blocking the stairs going down, so I turned around to whisper sorry, and what do you know, there's no one. I was tired, so I chalked this up to hallucination, but it felt real. Edit, we were in the South China Sea. Edit, pretty neat to see other Army/Navy folks with similar, if not the same exact experience. How many hours were you on duty that night? I swear I had experiences like that even in the barracks on land from sleep deprivation. I was standing in the hangar bay waiting for morning muster at dawn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Looking out at the ocean, I was intrigued by how smooth as glass the water was reflecting the clouds in the sky. Then the most beautiful, confusing, mesmerizing, and terrifying thing I ever saw happened. The water, for a moment, was so smooth that the horizon disappeared from view. The water was so smooth and reflective that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the sky began. I honestly got dizzy knowing I was in the middle of the ocean floating on water, but my eyes were trying to convince me the ship was floating on nothing. Then the water started slightly rippling and the horizon was visible again. Every morning at sea after that I looked at the horizon hoping it would happen again, but it never did. I've never found out what caused this scientifically. The closest thing I could ever find was it was some sort of variant of the Fata Morgana mirage. I don't think I will ever see anything as beautiful in my life ever again. Words fall extremely short at describing the feeling at that moment. One of the most magical nights I ever had been when I was serving in a NZ Navy warship, and we were homeward bound after a long and unpredictable deployment. I was dealing with a bout of insomnia, and decided to go down aft for a breath of fresh air. It was a very dark, moonless night, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I really began to appreciate the phosphorescence glowing in our wake, bright green against the dark water. Then I looked closer, to see a pod of dolphins playing in the phosphorescence, leaving their own bright glowing trails as they streaked through the water. Now, I knew what it was, and what caused it, but it was something that I imagine would have appeared quite mystical to sailors back in the past. It was stunning though. I sat and watched them for about an hour. Such a vivid memory. Oh sure. Lots of auditory hallucinations. You're all alone in the middle of the ocean, and you hear your name being called all the time. Or you're down below, and hear someone running on the deck. Original poster replies. Do you get any sort of training or warning like look, you'll eventually hear somebody calling your name, or do you just get used to that sort of stuff? Perhaps that's where the myth of the sirens came from. Old myths and tales exist for a reason. People experience things and try to find a way to explain them. I like how multiple cultures have dragons. That's pretty cool. My dad's done some trips into the Atlantic single-handed, he's reported many hallucinations. Mostly auditory, like hearing people call his name etc., but more scarily once he thought he saw a container ship about to run him down. You can't really sleep properly for the first few days because of all the coastal fishing boats, so it was probably just down to sleep deprivation. Alone in a small boat on the Atlantic. That's going to be a huge no thank you from me. St. Elmo's fire, in the Coral Sea. Extremely unsettling, and beautiful. When I was forward lookout, I saw a ball-type object bouncing right to left at the horizon. Definitely was no satellite nor a planeter. Not too sure what it was. Edit, it bounced like say a ball would. Was kind of weird experience, and if I remember right it was somewhere near Australia. Edit 2, since people keep asking, this was around 7 years ago. I work security on different ships. One time during night shift on a cruise ship, my colleague and I were in the security office watching the CCTV cameras and just talking crap to pass the time. At the exact same time we both saw a black figure Haddo pass in front of the camera in the children's play area. We both got super freaked out but kept watching the other cameras in the vicinity to see if whatever it was passed by those, as it was the only way it could go from where we saw it, and there was no way it could leave the area without passing by in front of one of the cameras. It never did, so we went to the area to check it out but obviously found nothing. Afterwards we went back to review the footage and didn't see any shadow moving in that camera again. Even though we both saw it the first time in the live feed. Needless to say, we kind of started avoiding the kids' area at night after that. A lot of death happens out at sea. It was about 3 a.m. during my watch on an ocean passage. I was sleep deprived and fatigued. The sailing yacht was silhouetted against the moon glistening on the water. Suddenly a dolphin jumped from the water below the boom, broad reach, and splashed back in. Then again. Then again. Then again for the next 3 hours, with the exact position and sound over and over and over. I felt like I was descending into madness because I couldn't stop the apparent delusion. I'm still not sure if there ever was a dolphin, or if it just happened once and was then stuck in some sort of mental loop. I was in the US Navy and worked in communications. I was a supervisor on my watch and enjoyed working the night tours while on deployment. We stood 12-hour watches from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 2 a.m. I hear some chatter over the 3MC, which is like our internal speaker system used between a few different stations on the ship. It's the bridge asking combat if they see anything on surface or air radar, maybe 10 miles out to our west. Combat returns with a negative and I don't think anything of it. About 15 minutes goes by and the bridge asks again, and asks are they sure there's nothing there. Then they ask us if we have any message traffic about any ships in the area, aircraft or anomalous weather patterns. I ask one of the guys on watch to perform the request and now my interest is piqued. I walk out of the comms center and head up to the bridge. I was on a frigate so the walk was quick, and I get up there and ask what's going on. One of my buddies points me over to the port side, and we walk over. There's about 5 or 6 circular-shaped lights about 10 to 15 miles out in the clouds, pretty large. They aren't moving or flying around but just looking stable. These lights are also casting lights downward on the ocean, and you can see the light refracting back at the water, almost as if it were a spotlight or a beam. From what we could see, it didn't appear to be lights shining up from the water because they wouldn't pass through the clouds. The clouds also weren't super thick, it was lightly overcast, and it was the middle of the night with no other light pollution on the water. There was nothing in message traffic about any ships, subs, or aircraft in the area. We were hundreds of miles from land and the last report of any unusual weather patterns was a waterspout a few hundred miles away. We tried to take pictures with our onboard digital camera, using a long exposure, but we couldn't capture the phenomenon. After about 90 minutes the lights slowly faded, one by one, and within 15 minutes they had completely disappeared. I'm sure there's some sort of weather or atmospheric condition for what we saw, but for all intents and purposes, it fit the description of a UFO. Unidentified flying object. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.